The tall heiress in the black wool dress steps onto the slate terrace with a woman whose hand she is holding, and 45 Halstons stop breathing at once. There is a mark on the woman's neck that the heiress put there the night before. The woman has not covered it. She has chosen the dress that shows it. The heiress has chosen daylight to walk her into. Champagne flutes hang mid-air. A cousin's laugh dies halfway through. The great-aunt's shawl slips, and she does not adjust it. Then the matriarch, in pearls at the center of the terrace, sets her glass down with a click that is not quite loud. She turns. And she begins, slowly, to walk toward them. If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description, tell us where you are watching from, and subscribe. I sat in the car for another minute before I opened the door. The gravel drive curved up to the main house, through a corridor of maples that had already started to turn. Somewhere ahead of me, on the wide slate terrace where the family had gathered before dinner for 4 generations, 40-odd Halstons were assembled with glasses in their hands, and a lifetime of Halston etiquette in their posture. I had been part of the household for 6 months. I had been in the same wing as Adair for 4 nights. I had been marked by her for approximately 8 hours. I turned the engine off, checked my face in the mirror. The mark was where she had left it, low on the side of my neck, just above the line of the collar I had chosen because it did nothing to hide it. I opened the door. 6 months earlier, I had arrived at Ashvale on a November afternoon that smelled of wood smoke. The drive up to the main house had felt endless. The maples had been almost bare. The estate had unfolded in front of me like a photograph of a life I had read about but never been inside. The great slate terrace. The boxwood parterres. The 2 greenhouses running down toward the lake. The boathouse, with its cedar shingles gone soft with age. I had been hired to catalog the Halston family's private collection. 12 months, fully residential, room and board in the guest wing while I worked. My contact had been Genevieve Boyd, the family's house manager for 2 decades, who had been polite over email and warm in person, and had made it clear on my first afternoon that Ashvale was a working estate, not a museum, and that I should not treat it like one. She had walked me to the library that same evening. It ran the length of the west wing, 3,000 square feet of shelving from floor to 12-foot ceiling, with a mezzanine that circled the room and a rolling ladder that had been there since 1889. Whitfield Halston, the patriarch, had died the previous spring, and his death had triggered the kind of institutional reckoning that old families avoid until they cannot. His will had specified a full inventory of the private collection within a year of his passing. She said, "At the end of the tour, you will meet the family across the year. Try not to be intimidated. Vivienne is fair. Beckett is loud. Adair is the one you will need to work with directly, since she chairs the foundation, and the collection technically reports to her committee." I said, "What is Adair like?" "Adair," she said, "is Adair." I did not understand what that meant then. I understood what it meant 3 weeks later. The first time I saw Adair Halston, she was standing in the library doorway at 7 in the morning, watching me work. She did not announce herself. She simply stood there, framed by the tall pocket doors, in dark slacks and a cream silk blouse with the top 2 buttons undone in the way of women who dress with total confidence. I was up on the mezzanine, sorting a section of early 20th century correspondence into acid-free folders, and I did not see her for a full 3 minutes. When I finally turned and looked down, she was already looking at me. She was tall. Not remarkably tall, but the kind of tall that read as height because of the way she held herself. Her hair was dark and cut just above her shoulders, one side tucked behind her ear, the other left forward in a way that had probably been carefully chosen. Her face was composed the way certain faces are composed, not blank, not cold, just entirely arranged, with no wasted expression and no unearned warmth. She was, I understood immediately, the most beautiful woman I had ever seen at close range. "You must be Miss Ashcroft," she said. Her voice was low and even. It was the voice of someone who did not raise her voice for anything. "Yes," I said. "Adair Halston." "I know," I said, and immediately wished I had said something else. Then I said, "Genevieve pointed you out in a photograph." The corner of her mouth moved. Almost nothing. half a millimeter. "Come down, please," she said. "I would like to talk with you." She asked me questions about my methodology, how I planned to structure the correspondence archive against the rare book inventory. She listened the way people listen when they are actually listening, not planning their next line, not waiting to be impressed. At the end of the conversation, she said, "Genevieve mentioned you asked for the guest wing rather than the staff apartments. Is the guest wing suitable?" "Yes," I said. "Thank you. It is very generous." She said, "It is not generous. It is the appropriate accommodation for the position. I did not want you working here for a year and feeling you were beneath the household." She turned and walked out. I stood at the foot of the ladder for a moment, watching the space where she had been, and understood that my quiet 12-month cataloging position had just acquired a variable I had not accounted for in any of my planning. The pattern established itself slowly across the winter. She came to the library in the morning sometimes, at 7, when the light was still coming through the east-facing windows sideways and yellow, and I was the only person in the room. She would stand in the doorway for a minute or two before I noticed her, and then she would greet me with the small, controlled nod that was her version of a greeting, and she would come in and take one of the wing-back chairs by the fireplace and read. She never asked me questions when I was working. She simply came into the room and existed in it. I told myself, for the first 3 weeks, that she was auditing my work. By December, I had stopped believing that. She came at hours when no auditing purpose could have justified her presence. 10 in the evening, Sunday mornings when the household was quiet. She never stayed very long. 40 minutes, an hour, she read. She looked up from her reading occasionally and looked toward the mezzanine or the long table where I worked. And she looked at me for as long as she wanted to look at me, and I never once caught her eye because I was very careful not to. Except once. Mid-December. 2 weeks before the family Christmas at Asheville. I had come down from the mezzanine to pull a volume from the lower shelves. I had turned around holding it, and Adair was standing not 2 feet from me, close enough that I could smell the perfume she wore that I had never been able to place, which was some combination of cedar and citrus and something warmer underneath. She had not made a sound crossing the room. "I did not hear you," I said. "No," she said. "You were focused." I held the book. She held her book. Neither of us moved. She said, "What did you find?" I said, "A letter I did not expect. Slipped into the end papers. Your great-grandfather to a friend in London. 1912. She said, "May I see?" I opened the volume between us. The letter was there, 4 pages, folded in eighths, brown at the edges. She leaned to look at it. Her shoulder was 3 inches from mine. She read the letter without touching it. She was that careful. When she was done, she said, "Log it separately, not with the volume. It belongs to the correspondence archive, not the book." I said, "I would have." She looked at me, really looked, for the first time since the November morning when she had stood in the doorway. She said, "I know." Then she stepped back. She stepped back the way people step back when they have registered that they are too close and are correcting for it. She went back to her chair by the fireplace and read for another 20 minutes and left the library at 11 without saying good night. I sat at the long table with the letter in front of me and felt my pulse in the sides of my neck. I understood, in that moment, that whatever this was, it was not going to resolve itself by accident. Christmas came and went. Adair was different in the crowd than she was in the library. More brittle, more managed, less accessible. She did not come to the library at all during the 10 days of the family Christmas. I noticed harder than I wanted to notice. She came back on the 2nd of January, and she found me in the library at 7, and she said, standing in the doorway with her coat still on, "Did anyone actually feed you during Christmas?" I said, "Genevieve fed me very well." She said, "That is not an answer to my question." She was, for the first time since I had known her, wearing what she had traveled in rather than what she had dressed for. I said, "I ate, I promise. Genevieve made a plate every night." She said, "Good. I did not want you to feel alone here at Christmas. I know that sounds like a small thing to say. I am saying it anyway." I said, "Thank you." She said, "Genevieve told me she made you a plate every night." I asked her twice. She took off her coat, hung it over the back of one of the reading chairs, and left the room to shower and change. I sat at the long table and did not work for 20 minutes. By late January, she came to the library 4 mornings out of 5. By early February, she was bringing me tea, on a small silver tray with 2 cups instead of 1. By early March, I understood that we had established a routine, and that neither of us was going to name it, and that both of us knew. In late March, she asked me, without any preamble, if I would like to see the boathouse. It sat at the bottom of the sloping lawn, beyond the greenhouses. It was closed for the winter. It was not on the standard tour. I said, yes. I met her on the terrace at 3. She was in a dark green wool coat that hid at her calves. We walked down through the boxwood parterres and along the flagstone path to the boathouse, and she unlocked the door and pushed it open. 2 boats, a rowing skiff and a small sailboat, both under canvas. A wooden bench along the back wall. A window that looked out onto the lake. Everything smelled of cedar and old varnish, and the faint mineral cold of a body of water that had been frozen at the edges for 6 weeks. She said, "My grandmother used to hide in here when the house was too much." I said, "Did she teach you to hide?" She looked at me. She said, "In her way." She stood at the window looking out at the lake. She said, "I have been trying to decide what to say to you for some time." I said, "About what?" She said, "You know about what." The boathouse was very quiet. I said, "I would like to hear you say it." She turned her head. She looked at me the way she had looked at me the December night, with the letter in my hands, and this time I did not look away. She said, "Not today." I said, "Why?" She said, "Because I would like to be sure of what I am saying before I say it, and I am not sure yet." I said, "That is fair." She said, "It is not fair to you, but it is what I have." We walked back to the house without speaking. That night I lay in bed in the guest wing, and understood, more clearly than I had understood anything since November, that Adair Halston was in love with me, and had been for some time, and that she was trying to figure out what to do with the fact. I understood, more slowly, that I was in love with her too. The family reunion was announced in April. Not the ordinary Christmas gathering. The biennial Asheville weekend, the specific event the family did every second year to honor the founding of the estate in 1893. Every branch of the family came. Vivienne Halston, Adair's mother, arrived at Asheville 5 days before the weekend to oversee the preparations. Vivienne was 62 years old, silver-haired, formidable in the specific way of women who had run a Fortune 500 board for a decade and had married into an older family than the one she was born into. She had never come to the library. She came to the library on the Wednesday before the weekend. She was wearing pearls and a navy silk shirt and slacks, and she stood in the doorway the way Adair stood in the doorway, which I only registered later as evidence of the fact that Adair had learned it from her. She said, "Miss Ashcroft, may I speak with you?" I said, "Of course, Mrs. Halston." She came in. She did not sit. She looked at me. She said, "The weekend will bring approximately 45 members of my family to this house. All of them are observant. I mention this because I want you to know that your work has been valuable to the estate, and I would prefer that you continue with it after the weekend without any complication." I said, "I understand." She said, "Do you?" I said. She said, "My daughter cares about her work at the foundation. She cares, I have observed, about a number of other things she does not talk about with me. I have never asked her about any of it, because Adair does not respond well to being asked. I am not asking you to change anything you are doing. I am asking you to be careful about the weekend." Which I am also, in my way, asking her. Then she said, "My mother-in-law came to this house in 1952 as the second wife of a man 20 years older than she was, and she was, for the first 15 years of her marriage, treated by the Halston family the way this family treats women who have been chosen but not, in their view, fully approved. I watched what that cost her. I have opinions about what this family does to people it decides are outside of it. I am telling you this because I want you to understand that when I say, be careful, I am not asking you to disappear. I am asking you to be careful about a specific set of people who will be in this house in 3 days, and I am asking my daughter to be honest about who she is bringing into their view." I said, "Thank you for telling me that," she said. "Do not thank me. I have not decided to help you. I have decided to tell you the truth about what you are walking into." She left the library. Vivian Halston had asked me, in a very specific, very careful way, to protect her daughter from whatever was going to happen at the weekend, which meant she knew. I did not see Adair for 2 days. She came back on the Friday night, the eve of the family's arrival, and she came to the library at 10 in the evening and stood in the doorway and looked at me. She said, "Come to the guest wing tonight after everyone is asleep. I would like to have the conversation, before the weekend, before the family, midnight." I said, "Yes." I sat in the sitting room. I had lit the small fire. I was in a soft charcoal sweater and dark trousers, and I had not touched my hair. She knocked at 3 minutes past midnight. She was in a cashmere sweater, the color of oatmeal, and dark jeans, and she had taken her makeup off entirely, and her hair was pulled back at the base of her neck in a low knot, and she looked younger and more vulnerable than I had ever seen her. She stepped inside. I closed the door. She said, "Thank you for staying up." I said, "You knew I would." We stood in the small sitting room by the fire. Then she said, "I have loved you since December. The letter in the end papers." I said, "I know." She said, "That is what I have been trying to figure out how to say, all of the ways of saying it that would not put you in a position you had not asked to be in." I said, "Adair. The position I have not asked to be in is the one where you have not said it. That is the one that was difficult, not this one." She looked at me. Her eyes were dark and steady, and not composed at all. She said, "I did not want you to feel you had to say anything back that you did not mean." I said, "I have been in love with you since the boathouse." She said, "I know." I said, "You knew and you did not say." She said, "I was trying to be certain. About what it would cost you. About what my mother would do." I said, "Your mother came to the library on Wednesday." She said, "I know. Genevieve told me. She has known for longer than either of us." The fire was low. I put another log on it. I turned back, and Adair had crossed the small distance between us. She said, "I do not know how to do this. The rest of it, the weekend, the family, my mother. I do not know what the right shape of it is." I said, "We will figure it out." She said, "But I am tired of not touching you." The room was very warm. I said, "So touch me." Her hand came up. She touched my jaw first, the way people touch things they have been imagining touching for a long time. Her thumb went along my cheekbone. Her fingers slid back into my hair at my ear. She was looking at my mouth, and she was looking at my eyes, and she was doing both at once with the same complete attention she brought to everything that had ever mattered to her. Then she kissed me. It was not frantic. It was worse. It was patient. It was the version of a first kiss that had been 6 months in the making and knew exactly what 6 months of not doing this had cost. She kissed me slowly and completely, and with the specific presence of a woman who was very sure of what she was doing. Her hand at my jaw did not press. It cradled. It anchored. I let her. Then I stopped letting her and started answering. When she pulled back, her forehead touched mine, and she was breathing more quickly than I had ever seen her breathe. She said, "Neve." She had never said my first name. I said, "Say it again." She said, "Neve." I kissed her. We moved from the sitting room to the bedroom. She did not ask. I did not offer. She sat on the edge of my bed and drew me between her knees. And she looked up at me from that seated height with the particular openness of a woman who had removed every layer of the armor she wore in the world and had chosen not to replace it with anything else. Her hands went to the hem of my sweater and stopped there. She was asking. I said, "Yes." She was patient the way she was patient with old paper. She was patient the way she was patient with me. She took the sweater off with the same slow care she brought to opening a wooden crate on the mezzanine. She looked at me without hurrying. Her thumbs traced the line of my collarbone the way she would have read the specific weight and hue of a hallmark on old silver. She traced the specific place under my jaw where a pulse lives, and paused there, the way you pause your finger on a signature that has come back into the family after 50 years, when you are trying to be sure it is what you think it is. She said, "You are so quiet." I said, "I am waiting." She said, "For what?" I said, "For you to stop being careful." She looked at me. Something in her face gave. It was the specific giving of the last careful composure. She said, "I am going to leave a mark." I said, "Do." She said, "I want them to see it tomorrow." I said, "Do." She said, "You do not have to." I said, "Adair, let them all see, all of them. Tomorrow, I want them to know." She looked at me for a moment that felt like the whole rest of my life beginning inside it. Then she lowered her mouth to the side of my neck, low, just above where my collar would sit in the morning, and she kissed me there for a long time. Not a peck, not a claim. The specific slow warmth of a woman who was deciding, in that moment, that she was going to spend the whole rest of her mouth on the specific piece of skin she had chosen, and take exactly as long as she wanted to take. She kissed. She lingered. She kissed again. She let her breath settle on the same place, and did not lift her head. And then she set her teeth against the skin, gently, and left the specific and deliberate evidence of a woman who had decided, at last, to be seen. I did not make a sound. I did not need to. My hand was in her hair at the back of her head, and the small of my back was against the edge of the bed, and I understood, without any part of me arguing with any other part, that I was giving her something she had waited 6 months to be allowed to take, and that she was accepting it with the specific gratitude of a woman who did not, as a general rule, accept anything without paying for it. When she lifted her head, her mouth was warm and her eyes were dark, and she was, for the first time in 6 months, entirely uncomposed. She said, quietly, and with the composed certainty she brought to everything, "Let them all see tonight." I understood, holding her face between both my hands, that she had just chosen the version of her life in which the family knew, in which her mother saw, in which nothing about tomorrow's dinner would be quiet again, and she had chosen it deliberately, and she had chosen it out loud. We did not go further that night than she had wanted to go. She had said what she came to say. She had done what she came to do. We lay on top of the covers in the specific quiet of a house at 3 in the morning, where 45 people would arrive in 12 hours, and around 5 she got up and put her sweater back on, and kissed me one more time on the mouth and went to her own bedroom. I slept for 2 hours. I woke up at 7 and looked in the mirror and saw the mark, and I understood that we had crossed something we could not uncross, and I was not sorry. Genevieve came to the guest wing at 8, with breakfast on a tray. She set it on the small table without looking at my neck. She said, "The family begins arriving at 10. The formal photograph is at 4. The dinner is at 7, Miss. Halston has requested that you attend the dinner." I said, "I understand." She said, "She did not tell me." I said, "I did not think she had." Genevieve looked at me for a moment. She said, "Miss Ashcroft, I have worked in this family for 20 years. I have never seen Adair Halston choose anything the way she has chosen this. Adair will need you today. She will not ask, 'Do you understand?'" I said, "I understand." I chose the dress that had been hanging in the wardrobe since November, deep green wool crepe with a modest scoop collar that ended 2 inches above my collarbones. It did nothing to hide what Adair had done. I did my hair up in the way that made the side of my neck fully visible. I did not put on a scarf. I did not put on the concealer that was in my bag. At 10, a soft knock came at the door. Adair was in the hallway in a black wool dress and pearl earrings, and she was looking at my neck with the very specific attention of a woman looking at the evidence of her own decision. She said, "You did not cover it." I said, "No." She said, "You said let them all see. I am letting them all see." She said, "Come downstairs when you are ready. Do not hurry. I love you, Neve." She had said it in her sitting room by the fire, but this was the daylight version. This was the version with the cars in the driveway and the family arriving. I said, "I love you." She kissed me. Not for long. Long enough to be sure. Then she went downstairs. Which brings me back to the driveway, to the gravel, to the moment I turned the engine off and understood that I was about to walk into a room with 45 Halstons who had been raised on the specific etiquette of not seeing what they were not supposed to see, and I was going to make it impossible for them to not see this. I opened the car door. I walked up the drive. I went in through the front. The great door was open. Genevieve was at the coat closet with a stack of coats in her arms. She looked up when I came in. She looked at my neck. She did not react. She said, "Miss Halston is in the small drawing room. She would like to see you before you go out." I opened the small drawing room door. Adair was standing at the window with her back to the room. She turned when I came in. She said, "Come stand with me." I crossed the room. The terrace was in view. 40+ Halstons in wool and silk and pearls, holding glasses. Vivienne at the center. Beckett with the younger cousins. Cordelia, the great aunt, at the edge of the terrace with a shawl around her shoulders. Adair said, "My mother is going to see you before anyone else does. She will not make a scene. She does not do scenes. She will simply arrange for what she thinks needs to happen next. I will be beside you. I am not going to defend it, or explain it, or apologize for it. I am going to introduce you, and I am going to be beside you, and I am going to let them see." I looked at her. She was already looking at me. I said, "That is the version I need." She said, "That is the version I have." She took my hand. Then she opened the door to the terrace, and we walked out into the family, together. And I felt every eye in the assembled crowd turn to us, and Vivienne Halston set her champagne flute down on the small side table beside her with a click that was not quite loud, and Cordelia's shawl slipped an inch from her shoulder without her adjusting it, and Beckett stopped mid-sentence, and every single Halston on the slate terrace registered, in one collective moment, exactly what they were looking at. And nobody, for the length of one specific and unbearable second, said anything at all. Then Vivienne Halston turned toward us, and she began to walk. She crossed the slate terrace with the specific measured stride of a woman who was making a decision as she walked, and did not care how many people were watching her make it. The family was silent. Every glass held midair. Every conversation stopped. Vivienne stopped in front of us. She looked at Adair, then at me. Her eyes did not linger on the mark. They noted it and moved past it, with the specific composure of a woman who had, apparently, been prepared for exactly what she was seeing. She said, "Miss Ashcroft, welcome to Ashvale Weekend." She turned toward the family. Her voice was not loud. It did not have to be. She said, "This is Miss Neve Ashcroft. She has been cataloging our library since November. My daughter has asked me to introduce her to you all, and I have agreed. Please make her welcome." I understood I was witnessing a very specific kind of decision being made in real time in front of 45 people. Vivienne Halston was not endorsing us. She was not blessing us. She was doing something more important. She was making it clear that whatever the family thought about what they were looking at, they were going to think it quietly, and they were going to be polite while they thought it. She turned back to us. She said, quietly enough that only Adair and I heard it, "We will need to talk. Not tonight, tomorrow." Adair said, "Thank you." Vivienne said, "Do not thank me. I told you last month that if you continued the way you were continuing, I would rather see you honest than see you clever. You have chosen honest. It is my turn to help you carry it." She kissed her daughter on the cheek. She did not kiss me. But she paused, close, and she said, "You are welcome in this house." She walked back to the center of the terrace. She picked up her champagne flute. She said, in her ordinary hostess voice, "Dinner is at 7. Cordelia, would you find a chair before the sun ruins your color?" And, as if she had thrown a switch, the terrace came back to life. Beckett was the first person to approach us. He was 30 years old, with the specific loose posture of a younger brother who had learned early on that his job in the family was to be the one who kept things warm when the temperature dropped. He said, "Miss Ashcroft, I am Beckett. I have been hearing about you for 6 months, and I am delighted to finally meet you." I said, "Hearing about me from whom?" He said, "Genevieve, mostly. My sister has never mentioned you at all, which is how I knew." Adair looked at him. He said, "Not now, I know, later." He turned to me. He said, "Are you all right?" I said, "I think so." He said, "Good. My mother has done the important thing. If any of the cousins are unkind to you tonight, tell me. I will handle it." The next hour was, in the specific way of large families, both very strange and completely ordinary. Adair introduced me to every cousin by name and did not soften her voice. She did not blush. She did not apologize. She stood beside me with my hand in hers, or her hand at the small of my back. Cordelia was the last person to approach us. She was 78, in a silver gray silk dress and a heavy woolen shawl. She had watched me all afternoon from her chair at the edge of the terrace, and she came to us now, with the small, careful walk of a woman whose knees no longer forgave her the confidence she had once had in them. She stopped in front of us. She looked at Adair. She said, "Adair, come here." Adair went to her. Cordelia put both hands on her face and looked at her. She said, "Your great-aunt Rosalind, may she rest, was in love with a woman she never introduced to this family. I knew about it. Your grandmother knew about it. Your grandfather knew about it and pretended not to. Rosalind died at 64 in a small house in Rhode Island where the woman she loved was also dying, and neither of them ever came to Asheville for a single Halston occasion. That is what this family does. That is what it did." She let go of Adair's face. She said, "You have just refused to do that, in front of 45 of us, in front of your mother. I have waited 50 years to see one of us do that, and I did not think I would live to see it. Thank you." Adair could not speak. Cordelia turned to me. She held out one hand. I took it. Her fingers were cold and light. She said, "Miss Ashcroft, look after my great niece. She is very good and very tired, and she does not know how to stop being either." I said, "I will." She said, "Come see me tomorrow, in my rooms. I will tell you the version of Rosalind that no one else in this family remembers." She patted my hand once. She went back to her chair. Inside, in the cool of the front foyer, Adair stopped. She said, "I did not know about Rosalind." I said, "I know." She said, "Nobody has ever told me, Neve. I need 1 minute." She turned her face into my shoulder. She did not cry. She simply stood there, in the front foyer of the house she had grown up in, with her forehead against the side of my neck opposite the mark, and she breathed for 1 full minute the way people breathe when they have just been told that they are not the first, and that the ones who came before them did not get what they were about to have. When she lifted her head, her eyes were very clear. She said, "All right." I said, "All right." The formal photograph was at 4, on the wide back lawn, in front of the great copper beech that had been in every Halston family portrait since 1898. Adair stood in the second row. That had been her assigned place for as long as she had been an adult. I stood at the edge of the terrace, holding my glass. I was not going to be in the portrait, and this was correct, and I was not upset about it. Then, Adair turned around. She looked at me across the lawn. She said, quietly enough that it did not carry, but clearly enough that I heard her, "Come here." I said, "Adair." She said, "Come here." Vivienne, standing beside her, said nothing. She was looking at the photographer. I walked out onto the lawn. Adair reached for my hand and drew me into the second row, into the empty space just beside her, where the arrangement of Halstons had been standing in various formations since the McKinley administration, and had never, in a century and a quarter, made room for anyone who was not born a Halston, or had not married one. The family did not react, not audibly. Vivienne did not turn her head. Beckett kept his face composed. The photographer said, "All right, chins up, look at me." She took the portrait. Adair kept my hand. She said, "You are the first person in 128 years to be in that portrait without being married to a Halston or born to one." I said, "I know." She said, "I did not tell my mother I was going to do that." I said, "She did not object." Adair said, "No, she did not object." The dinner was at 7 under the tent on the south lawn, 47 place settings, silver from 1888. I was seated between Adair and Cordelia. Vivienne rose to make the opening toast. She spoke about the estate, about her father-in-law's grandfather, and the specific vision he had when he bought this land in 1893. Then she paused. She said, "I want to add something to the ordinary toast this year. Every generation of this family has been given the opportunity to decide what kind of family it will be. That opportunity is not always used well. When it is, the family becomes something worth belonging to. She looked directly at Adair. She said, "My daughter has made a decision today that I did not know she was going to make when I sat down to breakfast this morning. I am proud of her for making it. I am prouder of her for making it in this house, in front of all of you, without asking permission from anyone." She raised her glass. She said, "To Ashvale." "Cheers," said 46 voices, more or less in unison. Adair, beside me, did not drink. She was looking at her mother with the specific expression of a woman who was seeing her mother do something she had never seen her mother do before. Cordelia, on my other side, said quietly, "She has been waiting for this. For years. To become the version of herself she has been carrying quietly since she married into this family. Vivienne was raised in a house that was not this house. She has been polite here for 40 years. She has never, until today, been herself." I said, "Because of Adair." Cordelia said, "Because Adair gave her permission." After dinner, Adair and I walked down the lawn to the boathouse. The May night was very still. She unlocked the boathouse. We went inside. She lit the small brass lamp on the bench and closed the door. She sat on the bench. She looked at me for a long time. She said, "Every worst possible version of today has not happened." I said, "No." She said, "I have been prepared for a version of my life where being with you cost me my family. I woke up this morning prepared for that version, and it did not cost me my family. My family, or most of them, or the ones I care about, are still my family." Cordelia gave me back an aunt I did not know I had lost. My mother did the most difficult thing I have ever seen her do. My brother offered to fight cousins for me before he had even said hello to you. I do not know what to do with an outcome I did not prepare for. I said, "You can just have it." She said, "That is not how I work." I said, "I know." She said, "You will have to teach me." I said, "We will figure it out." She said, "Together." I said, "Together." She stood up. She crossed the boathouse. She kissed me the way she had kissed me the night before, patient and complete, and with the specific gratitude of a woman who had understood, at last, that she was not going to have to give anything up in order to have this. We went back to the house at midnight. Vivienne was on the terrace with Cordelia and Beckett, drinking cognac. She did not say anything to us as we passed. She raised her glass once, small, and went back to her conversation. Adair took me to her rooms. Not the guest wing. Her rooms, on the second floor of the west wing, which I had never been inside. She closed the door behind us. She said, "This is where I have wanted you for 6 months." I said, "I know." We did not hurry. She undressed me the way she had begun to undress me the night before, with the slow accounting of a woman who had already been patient with me and was going to be patient again. She kissed the mark she had left on my neck and did not apologize for it. She kissed the specific bones under it. She said my name once, quietly. The way you say a word you have not been allowed to say and have finally been given. The room was warm. The bed was old. It had been in her family since her grandmother's marriage, and I noticed that only because Adair told me, with her mouth against the skin at my temple, that she had been thinking about it since November. She was careful with me, the way she was careful with the family papers she now trusted me to log. She read me the same way, slowly, with the specific attention that came from knowing that no piece of what she was looking at could be replaced. Her hands moved over me, the way her eyes had moved over the letter in the end papers, taking in the specific weight and shape of each finding, not hurrying. She kissed the inside of my wrist the way you kiss something that has been waiting to be kissed for 6 months, and then she kissed the specific place where the pulse comes closest to the surface, and then she kissed my palm, which nobody had ever done to me before, and I understood, from the way her mouth stayed there, that she was going to remake every ordinary landmark of my own body into something we shared. She lit a candle instead of the lamp. The light was warm and small. It moved on the wall behind her the way firelight had moved on the wall the night before. She said, at some point, without lifting her mouth from the specific slope where the shoulder becomes the neck, "I have thought about this for 6 months." I said, "I know." She said, "I did not know if I would ever have it." I said, "You have it." She said, "I know I have it now. I mean before. I mean the months of not knowing. I said, I know what you mean. She lifted her head. She looked at me. She said, do not let me be careful. Not tonight. Tonight the careful is a different careful. It is the careful of knowing this is the first night, and I want to be present in every minute of it. It is not the careful of holding myself away. I said, I know the difference. She said, good. She kissed the corner of my mouth, then the center of it. Then the specific place at my temple where I had felt her breath the night before when she had left the mark. She kissed each of the places she had considered kissing across 6 months and had chosen not to, and she named none of them out loud, and I felt her name all of them anyway. When she came back to me, when she settled beside me on the old bed and drew me toward her, I felt for the first time since November that I had arrived somewhere I did not have to leave. Her hand rested at the small of my back, the way a hand rests when it has stopped being a question. She said, stay. I said, I am staying. She said, no, I mean stay. Here, in this room, in this house. After the contract ends, after the collection is done. I do not want to think about you leaving in November. I said, I know. She said, I am asking. I said, yes. She said, you have not thought about it. I said, I have thought about nothing else for 3 weeks. She said, you knew what I was going to ask. I said, I hoped. She kissed me. The kiss was answer enough. I answered it back. What we did after was patient and thorough and completely private, and it took a long time, and it did not, at any moment, feel like something we were doing for anyone but each other. She had learned me across 6 months of watching. She used that knowledge the way she used everything else, slowly. With the specific attention of a woman who had never taken a shortcut in her life, she learned what steadied me and used it. She learned what undid me and used that. She did not rush any part of any of it. I understood, as the candle burned down and Adair fell asleep with her head against my collarbone, in the specific quiet of a house that had learned something about itself in the previous 18 hours, that whatever the two of us were building now had already been built. In some interior room, neither of us had ever shown to anyone else, for months. The night was only where we finally moved in. I slept for 6 hours. It was the longest sleep I had had at Ashvale in 6 months. Vivienne came to find us at 9 the next morning in the small breakfast room off the kitchen. She came in with her own coffee. She sat directly across from us, as if the 3 of us had, at some point in the previous 18 hours, become the same kind of adults. She said, 3 things. First, what happened on the terrace yesterday was not planned by me. If you had come out at any other moment, I do not know what I would have done. Second, you are going to hear from Wendell within the month. I am telling you this now so that when the letter or the phone call arrives, you will not react before you have consulted me. Third, Miss Ashcroft. I said, yes. Vivienne said, I intend to treat you as a member of this household. That does not mean I will not be watching. I watch everyone. It does mean that when I watch you, I will be watching for what you need, not for what you might get wrong. I said, yes. She said, good. She stood up. At the door, she paused and said, without turning around, Cordelia will need somebody to sit with her this week. She is going to say more than she has said in 50 years, and she will need someone to hear it. I think it should be you, Miss Ashcroft, not Adair. I said, please call me Neve. She said, not yet. I would like to know you a little longer first, but soon. She left. The family began to leave that same morning at 11. Vivienne stood on the terrace with a coffee cup and said goodbye to each branch of the family individually. She said goodbye to me the same way she said goodbye to her nieces, which was with a small, warm hand on my forearm and the specific, unhurried attention of a woman who had, definitively, decided. By 3, the estate was quiet again. Cordelia stayed a week. I sat with her every afternoon, in her rooms, and she told me about Rosalind. About the woman Rosalind had loved, whose name had been Ivy Merivale, and who had been a librarian at a small college in Rhode Island for 34 years. About the small house they had built together at the end of a long dirt road. About the letters Rosalind had written that Cordelia still had in a walnut box under her bed, which she wanted me to have when she died. She told me Ivy had died 6 months before Rosalind. That Rosalind had written her last letter to a cousin who had never answered it, asking whether she might, at long last, be allowed to bring Ivy to Ashvale one summer, and that the cousin had chosen not to answer because the summer was full. Cordelia said she had learned about this only after Rosalind's death, when she had found the draft of the letter in a drawer, folded, unsent. She said, "One afternoon, I have carried the specific weight of that letter for 30 years. I know now what to do with it." I did not tell her about the letter I had found in December. I did not need to. Vivienne stayed at Ashvale for another 2 weeks and then went back to Boston. Before she left, she came to the library one morning and stood in the doorway and said, "Miss Ashcroft, I would like to ask you to call me Vivienne." I said, "Vivienne." She said, "My daughter has been in love with you since December. I have known since January." I did not intervene because I did not think it was mine to intervene in until it began to cost her. When it began to cost her, I intervened by asking her to be honest with you, which she was. She said, "I want you to know that I have not helped you, because I was persuaded that this was the correct outcome. I have helped you because Adair asked for the outcome she asked for, and she was correct that she was allowed to ask for it, and I would rather help her have what she wanted than help her lose what she needed." I said, "I understand." She said, "I know you do. That is why I like you." She left the library. Wendell Halston, Whitfield's younger brother, wrote to the Foundation Board on the 14th of June. He proposed that Adair's continued chairmanship of the Foundation was inappropriate in light of what he called the specific situation that had been made visible at the family reunion. Adair drove to Boston that morning in a dark suit. She came back at 7 in the evening. She sat down in her chair by the fireplace. She did not take her coat off. She said, "I gave them 3 options: that the board vote on Wendell's motion, which I would let stand if it passed; that the board reject Wendell's motion and issue a statement acknowledging that the chairmanship had never been contingent on the private arrangements of the chair, and that it would not begin to be so on my watch; that the board neither vote nor issue a statement, in which case I would resign publicly and cite their failure to make a decision as my reason." I said, "What did they do?" She said, "They rejected Wendell's motion. 9-1. The one was Wendell. They issued the statement I asked for. My mother wrote it. She is on the board." I said, "You could have lost it." She said, "I know. I was prepared to. It was worth losing." I said, "Come here." She came to me. She had not taken her coat off. I helped her out of it. I hung it on the back of one of the reading chairs, and I sat with her in front of the fireplace, and neither of us said anything for a long time. Wendell wrote a second letter in late June, this one directly to Adair, asking her to reconsider. Adair wrote a response of exactly 3 sentences. "I have received your letter. I have considered its contents. My arrangements at Ashvale, personal and professional, will remain as they are." She signed it. She sent it. Wendell resigned from the board in July. He did not return to Ashvale for the following Christmas. He was, in the specific way of Halstons, who have chosen to remove themselves from Halston occasions, no longer a person the family discussed. Cordelia died on a Thursday morning in early September. She had been ill for 2 weeks. Vivienne had come to be with her. I was in her room when she died. She had my hand in one of hers and Adair's hand in the other, and she had said, an hour before she went, that she had been waiting a long time to feel finished, and that she felt finished now. She left me the walnut box. The letters inside it were more than I had understood them to be. Not only Rosalind's letters to Ivy, though those were there. Also Ivy's letters back. Also the drafts of letters Rosalind had written to family members and never sent. Also, a small photograph of the 2 of them on the porch of the Rhode Island house, taken at some point in the 1960s, which I had never seen anywhere else. I sat with the box for a full afternoon before I opened it. When I did open it, I logged everything, one item at a time, into a small folio I began that day and have added to since. Adair sits with me sometimes while I do it. She does not touch the letters. She looks at them and lets me handle them, the way she had looked at the letter in the end papers the December night we had crossed nothing yet. I keep the walnut box on the shelf in the room where I catalog now, which is not the library. It is a smaller room, off the study, that Adair had converted for me after the contract ended in November, and I stayed. The library is still the library. The estate archive is a project that will take me the rest of my working life. I have decided this is fine. I moved into Adair's rooms in November. We did not make an announcement. Genevieve, who had known for months, simply had my things transferred one afternoon while we were in Boston. When we came back, Adair looked at the new arrangement and said, "Genevieve." Genevieve said, "Yes, Miss Halston." Adair said, "Thank you." Genevieve said, "You are welcome." She never called me Miss Ashcroft again after that day. She called me Neve. The first winter of living together at Ashvale was quieter than any winter of my adult life. Adair went to Boston 3 days a week, as she always had. I catalogued in the mornings and walked to the boathouse in the afternoons, and sat with the letters some evenings after dinner. She came home Thursday nights and stayed through Sunday. On the Sundays we did nothing. This was the specific luxury I had never had before. Doing nothing with somebody who did not require to be entertained, sitting in the same room with somebody who could be quiet in it without needing me to fill the silence. She read. I read. We ate. We slept. The house learned our rhythm and made room for it. By the second Christmas, when the family filled Ashvale again for the 10 days of the holiday, I ate at the family table, not with the staff. I helped Vivienne with the seating chart because she had asked me to, and because she had discovered that I was better at large group logistics than she had assumed a former archivist would be. She said. When the chart was done, "You are quite useful," I said. "Thank you, Vivienne." She said, "I did not mean it as a compliment. I meant it as a fact." I said, "I know." The corner of her mouth moved. Almost nothing. The next Ashvale weekend was 2 years after the first one. Wendell was not there. Cordelia was not there. Vivienne opened the weekend with a toast that did not mention the previous one, but that acknowledged, in the specific coded way of families who have moved on from something without discussing it, that a decision had been made, and a family had continued. I stood beside Adair for the family portrait. It was our second one. The photographer was the same woman from Providence. She said, "Welcome back." I said, "Thank you." She said, "You are in the second row again." I said, "Same spot." Beckett had brought a woman with him this time, a doctor from Providence he had been seeing for a year. She stood in the third row and looked, I thought, slightly frightened, and I decided that after the portrait I would go and stand next to her and be kind. I did. She said to me, quietly, before the dinner, "Is it always like this?" I said, "It gets better. Beckett is good. His family is manageable. Vivienne likes you." She said, "How can you tell?" I said, "She addressed you by your first name in the receiving line." "She does not do that unless she means it." She said, "Oh." I said, "You will be fine." After dinner, Adair and I walked down to the boathouse. We opened it and lit the small brass lamp and sat on the wooden bench where her grandmother had sat when the house was too much. The May night was very still. The lake was black and reflecting the last of the twilight above the tree line. Then Adair said, "Do you know what today is?" I said, "The reunion." She said, "Yes, but also, 2 years since I marked you before dinner." I said, "I remember." She said, "I have thought about that night every day since it happened. I did not know then what I was walking into. I thought I was walking into losing everything. I said what I said in your room because I did not know if I would have another chance to say it." I said, "You said it beautifully." She said, "I meant it more than I said it." I said, "I know." She was quiet. She said, "I would do it again. The mark, the morning, the walk out onto the terrace, all of it. I would do every part of it again, exactly the way it happened." I said, "So would I." She said, "Neve, I want you to marry me. I have been trying to find the right way to ask for 2 months." Genevieve tried to help me plan it. She had 5 different plans. I could not commit to any of them because none of them felt like the version of asking you that I wanted. "We ended up here." I said, "Yes." She said, "You have not thought about it." I said, "I have thought about nothing else for 2 months." She said, "You knew what I was going to ask." I said, "I hoped." She kissed me. The lamp had burned low. The lake outside was black. The boathouse smelled of cedar and old varnish, and the specific mineral cold of a body of water that had held its shape for 130 years and was still, tonight, entirely composed. She said, "I do not have a ring." I said, "I do not need a ring tonight." She said, "You will have one by the weekend." I said, "I know." She said, "It is my grandmother's ring. My mother has been holding it for me since I was 22. She gave it to me last week." I said, "Vivienne?" She said, "Yes." I said, "She knew." She said, "She always knows." We were married the following May, on the same lawn where the copper beech held the family portraits, in front of 38 people who wanted to be there, on a day that Vivienne had planned with the specific composed patience of a woman who had waited 70 years for the correct occasion to plan. Cordelia's walnut box was on the small table beside the officiant. I had asked for that. Adair had understood. Beckett walked me down the aisle because I had asked him to, and because he had been kind to me from the first hour of the first reunion and had never once treated it like it was work. Vivienne stood beside Adair. Genevieve stood beside me. The doctor from Providence, who Beckett had married the previous September, held their small daughter, who was 6 months old and named Rosalind after a great-aunt her father had heard about only 2 years earlier. The vows were the vows Adair and I had written together at the kitchen table over 3 evenings. She said, "I have been trying to say this since the letter in the end papers. I have finally found the room to say it. I love you. I will love you in this house for the rest of my life. I will not be careful about it." I said, "You said let them all see." I have not stopped letting them all see. I do not intend to stop. We were pronounced. We kissed on the lawn with the copper beech behind us, and the lake below us, and the whole assembled family in front of us, and nobody, this time, hesitated to say anything at all. Vivienne kissed me on both cheeks in the receiving line and said, "Welcome to the family." I said, "Thank you, Vivienne." She said, "I have been calling you that for a year. It is time you were." Genevieve, when I got to her, held both my hands and said, "Miss Halston." I laughed. I said, "Do not." She said, "I have been waiting to. Let me." I said, "Genevieve." She said, "Yes." I said, "Thank you for the plate every night at Christmas." She said, "She asked me twice." I said, "She asked you every year." She said, "She did. She has been asking me every year since the year you arrived. I knew before either of you did." She let go of my hands. We live at Ashvale. Adair chairs the foundation. I finished the collection catalog in the 5th year of my work, and then began the estate archive, which is now 9 years old and probably has another 20 in it. We have not had children. We considered it. We decided that what we had was already the shape of the household we wanted, and that we did not want to change it. Beckett and the doctor from Providence have 3, which is enough Halstons for the next generation to carry the estate forward. Rosalind, the oldest, spends every summer with us. She calls Adair Aunt Ada, which nobody has ever been able to explain, and calls me Aunt Neve, and by the age of 11 she had read every book in the library, which we both agreed did not surprise us. When she was 14, she asked me, one afternoon in the library, about the letter I had found in the end papers of the volume of Rossetti. I asked her how she had known about the letter. She said Cordelia had told her, before Cordelia died, that when she was old enough to understand it, she should ask me. I gave her the letter to read. She read it twice and gave it back, and did not say anything for a long time, and then she said, quietly, "You are so lucky, nobody made you hide." I said, "Yes." She said, "I would like to be lucky like that." I said, "You will be. This family will make sure of it now." She nodded once. She did not cry. She went back to her book. She has not asked me anything about that afternoon since. She has not needed to. Vivienne died in her sleep the winter of the year Rosalind turned 14. She had been 81. She had left a letter to the family that was read at the memorial service and that ended with the sentence, "I have loved every one of you in the specific way you needed to be loved, and I have tried to be fair." Adair chaired the foundation for another 8 years, and then stepped back into a role she had designed for herself, which involved less administration and more of the specific slow work of directing the collection I had built and the estate archive I was still building. She said, at the age of 49, that she had decided she was done being the person the family called first, and that Beckett, who was by then 45 and completely qualified, could be the person the family called first from that day forward. Beckett agreed. He said it was about time. The mark on my neck faded, of course, within weeks. It was gone by the end of that first summer. It had never been the point of the mark. The point of the mark had been the sentence. Adair said when she left it, "Let them all see tonight." She has said versions of that sentence to me 100 times since. She has said it every anniversary of that first weekend. She has said it in bed on ordinary Tuesday mornings for no reason. She has said it in front of Rosalind, who at 14 understood exactly what it meant and told her mother she thought Aunt Ada was the coolest person in the family. She was not wrong. I am 52 years old now. Adair is 59. The catalog is done. The archive is not. The library still smells the same at 7 in the morning as it did the first November. Adair still comes into it and stands in the doorway sometimes before I know she is there, and I still let her, because there is a specific kind of quiet in a house you have built with somebody that does not need to be filled. Last week, on the anniversary of the reunion, we sat on the terrace with a bottle of the wine Vivienne had liked, and Adair said, quietly, with the composed certainty she brings to everything, "Let them all see tonight." The terrace was empty. There was nobody to see. I said, "They already have." She said, "They have." I said, "Adair." She said, "Yes." I said, "Come inside." She did.